How many times does it happen where you've done an open style workout and then realize that, oh man, I haven't done these movements together before, or maybe not in the format that they showed up. So for example, like how many people actually have done pistols and clean and jerks together before 20.4 came out, just because they didn't even practice those unique combinations of movements. So let's flip that and say that you've been meaning to improve your 1 rep max snatch for the last 18 months, but you only snatch heavy once a week and you mainly do conditioning based metcons in a class format. So that's just as much of an issue. Like you're not actually working on what you need to work on. So it comes down to balancing a regimented, calculated plan with the unknown and unknowable nature of the sport of fitness. It's about striking a balance in structure versus variety. The fitness movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all one place, zorfitness.com. Today's outline, I want to go over first definitions of structure and variety. So technically, dictionary definitions to start off, and then more so working definitions, how I'm going to be using it in the context of the conversation today. Then after I do that, we'll go into some pros and cons of each of these. So basically thinking about the benefits or potential costs of structure in a training program versus those same benefits or costs for variety within a training program. And then lastly, we're going to take that and try to dissect as to how we can blend these into a comprehensive training program. So, maybe in what types of cycles and what environments is structure a higher priority, or is variety maybe a higher priority? So thinking about how we can balance these two elements. So let's jump into the definitions. The first thing is structure. So the dictionary definition of structure is something arranged into a definite pattern of organization. There's a very clear outline or scaffolding effect that happens with structure that doesn't happen with variety. So if we think about variety, the dictionary definition is the quality or state of having different forms or types. So for example, if we take varieties of a snatch, we could do a power snatch, a squat snatch, a hang power snatch. We could do snatch pulls. We could do snatch balances or snatch drops or overhead squats. These are all variations of the snatch. And exercise variety is just one type of variety. We could do that within the structure of the week or the length of the workouts or the types of pairings that we're doing, or you name it. There's a million different things that we could change in terms of variety. So let's go into some working definitions. My definition of structure, the way I'm thinking about it for this conversation, is metrics like volume, load, density, or more so carefully selected and progressed linearly over a period of time for improving specific movements. So it's much more calculated and much more clearly defined and regimented than it might be if something had low structure. And in my working definition of variety, it's doses of patterns, volume, load, or density undulate, mimicking the testing body of the sport. So they're not really holding to a specific pattern or a outline. And this needs to be a little bit more relaxed or just overall less regimented to a degree. So even a very structured plan has variety built into it, and even a very varied plan will have structure to it. So let's say that you're only doing running training, where the only thing that you really care about and the only metrics that you really pay attention to is your running performance. There still can be quite a variety within that. So it could be maybe the time domain that you're running at. So are you doing sprinting versus long distance running? Are you doing running on a track with spikes, or are you running on a trail which involves a different type of shoe and a different type of cadence? Are you running exclusively with running, or are you going to start to pair that with other things? So even within, if you're only doing one single thing, which seems like that is extremely structured, there's quite a bit of variety that can be naturally built into that. Or we could flip that around where someone's only doing metcons every day. So maybe 5 days a week, they're doing metcons. And that is something inherently has a lot of variety, but even within that, there's a lot of structure. So the movements, the reps, the loading may not be necessarily literally progressing or closely tracked even, but you're still having some consistency because number one, you're doing Metcons every day, but you're also probably doing maybe the same 25 to 30 exercises a lot of the time where you're involving a barbells and certain bodyweight movements a lot. Like you're probably doing a lot of burpees or box jumps or wall balls or other things like that, just because there's consistency within the exercise selection. There's consistency in maybe the time demands or the types of intervals that are coming up. So even within a very varied plan, there is a lot of structure that can take place. So the debate today isn't if we should pit one of these against each other. They're not versus each other, but where on the spectrum of extremely structured versus extremely varied should your training fall? So let's go into pros and cons of each of these within a training structure. So first we'll go into advantages of structure. So really here, the variables are really easy to measure. So in other words, you can really easily track how many snatches you're doing a week if you're doing a set weightlifting program, or how many clean and jerks you're doing above 70% or something like that. And it's really easy to begin to track your intensity, be able to track your volume of things, to be able to track all the different metrics. And as a result of that, another advantage here is that you can make adjustments to the program fairly easily if something's going wrong. So for example, you can say, oh man, my knees are feeling a little beat up. Oh, I can look at the number of hard sets I'm doing in squatting per week, and maybe I can lower the total number of sets that I'm doing in terms of squatting, or just raise the intensity of that so the volume can be a little bit lower, and then hopefully my knees feel a little better. It's a pretty simple equation for changing these metrics. Or for example, if your back squat hasn't gone up in 2 years, you can look back to your past training and can fairly easily reverse engineer what was going on during that particular time in your training to be able to apply it to what's going on now so that you can continue to improve your back squat. It's not necessarily saying that your back squat will get better by doing what you did in the past, but you can very easily reverse engineer things that have worked in the past if you can very easily see what was actually going on in your training during that time, because it had a high level of structure. Whereas if something was greatly varying, it's a lot harder to determine what specific things actually contributed to you getting better during that time. So some of the disadvantages of structure, the main thing I would say is that the sport of fitness isn't highly structured. So for example, if you are only training a single movement at a time, so for example, maybe you do snatch clusters and then you move to front squats and then you do strict upper body pulling, and you're moving from A to B to C down through your program, and it's very regimented and specific, but you can probably make good progress with that. But the other thing is you don't get experience of how those interplay with one another. So you don't get those unique movement combinations, which is the sport. Like that's something that is necessary for the sport. So then some people try to get very structured about how they program certain movements pairings together. So for example, if we know that handstand push-ups and deadlifts show up a lot in the open, we're going to start to program those two together, which actually is a super helpful thing because statistically speaking, there are certain movements that just come up way more often in terms of pairings. However, this is certainly limited because there are thousands of potential combinations in Metcon, so you can never hit all the movement pairings, especially if you're going beyond couplet. So if you're only doing like two movements at a time, okay, maybe you can do quite a few of the main ones. Maybe you do like thrusters and pull-ups. You could do handstand push-ups and deadlifts. You could do rowing and wall balls. But you have to realize that's only a certain number of potential tests within a body of tests. So there's way too many combinations of movements that could happen that you're never going to be able to hit all of those in a structured way in the sport. So there's just far too many combinations of movements where you could not possibly hit all of those if you're trying to do that in a structured way. So some of the advantages of variety are that you're more likely to hit more combinations of movements within a given training week or cycle, just because you're going to get more novel combinations. And that's how the sport is tested. So it's probably slightly more sport specific in that sense. However, a disadvantage of that is that you probably won't get significantly better at any single metric unless you're starting to actually tailor your training towards a specific metric. And then by definition, you're getting more structured as you're doing that. So you're moving away from variety. So let's make this more clear. If you're not getting better in your varied program at maybe doing muscle ups and Metcons, then you really have no clear way of actually getting better at muscle ups besides just maybe throwing them in a little bit more often into your programming. And while that works for people who are maybe at a higher level or really athletic or, maybe just gifted is the right word, that's not going to work for a lot of people. So progressing is super challenging if you're doing a highly varied program. And almost by nature, if you start progressing something, then your training is less varied. You're moving towards a structured program by actually progressing and doing something that's a little bit more linear or, for lack of a better word, structured. So then if we go to our last section, let's think about how we can blend these together into a comprehensive training program. So the solution that I'm proposing is that different training phases should have different amounts of structure and variety. Now I have a diagram that I put on the site in the show notes to illustrate this, where I have different training phases on a graph where the x-axis is variety and the y-axis is structure. And you can see where these different training phases are supposed to fit in this matrix of structure and variety. So you can check that out at zorfitness.com/podcast/033. So I'll walk you through each one of these and give you a brief explanation for each. So the first one is competition prep. And in competition prep, you need high variety because that's how the sport is tested and you're preparing for the testing of the sport. However, you still need to be able to work on some of the things that you personally are not as good at, unless you're an elite athlete and most of your skills are pretty refined and you're just putting touches on things. That's not the case for most people. Like most people need to at least have moderate structure built into competition prep so that they continue to get better at the things that they particularly are lacking at. So for example, say you're strong enough in weightlifting movements and cyclical activities, but you're not as good at gymnastics. You might need to continue to do fatigued muscle up progressions, things like that as you get closer to competition, which will still involve higher levels of structure, even though you're getting close to competition which you are likely to get a highly varied number of tests. So in competition prep, we're thinking high variety, moderate structure. In an actual competition phase then, where you're in the middle of competing, like think of it as during the 5 weeks of the open, you need pretty low variety because you really don't want to be getting sore. You want things to be pretty predictable and you know how you're going to respond to the training that you're giving yourself, and that you can continue to work on touches of certain movements that you haven't seen yet, where you have a very high likelihood of seeing those movements. So if it's week 4 of the open and you still haven't done thrusters and pull-ups, I would spend a lot of time prepping yourself to get ready for those movements. This doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be doing those movements specifically, because that could actually wear you down more. However, starting to think about how you can improve those specific movements that you'll need in a competition. So in a competition phase, low variety, high structure. So it's much like it would actually be a limiter phase or an off-season phase where you're working on your weaknesses, where this is a very structured time in your training. If we move to post-competition recovery, so you just got done with, let's just stick with the example of the open. You just finished the open, so it's now March, and you have, for most people, an off-season. So this is rather than saying off-season, a lot of people think of off-season as actually training. I'm thinking about this as a post-competition recovery. So they're actually doing things that are very low structure and extremely high variety to keep things fresh, to have your mental side be recovered and your body also just be recovered from the repetitive stressors that you've gotten over the course of the last, maybe 16 weeks of bridge, competition prep, and actual competition. So the goal here is to have you just doing a lot of things that you maybe normally would not do, just for the sake of variety from a mental and physical perspective. Then if we go into off-season, which what I would consider to be a limiter phase, or you could call it like working weaknesses. And here you're going to have low variety and high structure. So you really focus on getting as many touches as the things that you're not as good at during that time. And as a result of that, you are just not going to be having touches of the things that you are pretty good at already and you don't need as much work on. So the goal is just to maintain a lot of the qualities that you have while you improve and build upon other ones. And you can really only do that if you are tailoring your training to it. So it's much more regimented and highly structured in an off-season format. Then you're going to bridge and start to hit maybe more of a transitional phase, you might call it, where this is going to be moderate variety and moderate structure. So you're going to take the very high structure of the off season and you're going to start to blend that into a more comprehensive program where you're hitting some of the things that you did not hit as often. You're going to start to take your energy systems work or your strength work and actually blend that into things that look a little bit closer to Metcon. So maybe it's mixed intervals, or maybe it's broken Metcons where you stop every once in a while to recover. And really you're just starting to move towards competition prep again. So those are the different phases that could show up in your programming. A few things to think about. When you're working weaknesses, you're going to need lots of structure, because if you're trying to improve a specific metric, that's the only way that you're actually going to improve it, is by giving it focused work. And if you're giving it focused work, it can't just be random, right? So by nature, if something is focused, it is not random. So we have to really be calculated in the doses and surgical in how you go about attacking those weaknesses. And then when you're getting to compete, this is the other part of this, you need lots of variety because you need to prepare for the chaotic testing body of the sport. And that's really the two things that you have to think about. Structure when you're trying to improve a specific metric, and then incorporating as much variety while continuing to improve those specific metrics that you know you need to improve as you get close to competing. So I want to stay on these training phases and give some examples of a weekly outline or template as to what you could use for each of these different training phases. So for example, what should an off-season training phase, or what could an off-season training phase look like day to day? What potentially could someone be doing on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, like your hard training days? What is it going to look like? So that's sort of the goal. I'm going to go through each of those different phases. So off season, the bridge or transition phase, then to competition prep, then the actual competition phase itself, then to a post competition recovery phase. So as we go through each of these are just examples. Keep that in mind. And it's just something where I want to have you be able to see the differences between the off-season phase that someone could be doing to a competition prep phase that someone could be doing, because those are kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum. And then everything else is blending those shades between that. So let's jump into the first one, and it will hopefully make more sense once I actually get into this. So this is an off-season phase where someone could be working on their limiters and weaknesses. Again, this is low variety, high structure. So for example, let's say this person is trying to develop their weightlifting numbers and their gymnastics capacity while just trying to maintain some conditioning, which is the case for a lot of people, competitors especially. They're trying to drive up their 1 rep maxes and just maintain conditioning during this period. So Monday could be snatch percentage work, secondary hinges, so things like pulls or deadlifts, and then it may be a bar muscle up volume progression, where week 1, maybe you're doing 20 total reps over the course of, maybe just say it's 10 or 15 minutes, and then that continues to build. So it's like 15 to 18 to 21, and that volume continues to build. And then maybe a transitional phase that might move to something else, but for now, it's just a volume progression. Tuesday could be clean jerk percentage work, followed by back squats and strict dips. So very regimented. You know exactly what exercises you're doing. You know about the intensity that those are going at. You know exactly what patterns are being tested there. And there's very little variety from week to week. Like, you're still going to be doing clean jerk percentage work when you come back next Tuesday. The next Tuesday after that, guess what? You're still doing clean jerk percentage work. It's very static, structured, consistent, linear, and that's going to progress over time. Wednesday, you're back to snatch percentage work. You could do strict chest to bar pulling now, and then some erg-based cyclical work to continue to work, or at least maintain that conditioning. Friday could be powers, so that could be snatch and clean and jerk, front squat, and then some oblique pulls as some secondary assistance work. And then Saturday could be you're very close to a max day or a heavy day where you're doing a heavy snatch and a heavy clean jerk, and then you could follow that by some sport work with a Metcon, which there's the variety. You can see that a Metcon, it could be literally any number of movements. I mean, likely it's not going to be like heavy snatch or clean jerk, right? But beyond that, it could be barbell cycling, it could be gymnastics, it could be double unders or box jumps or other body weight movements. It could be, who knows, right? It could be more of a gymnastics element. It's really open-ended, and that's on purpose because that's where the variety is. So that was that athlete's off season. So if we take that same athlete, we move them towards a bridge phase, a transitional phase, and this is where you're going to start to see more variety. So it's moderate variety and moderate structure. We're keeping a lot of the structure, but we're starting to move more variety into this program so that it reflects the sport a little bit closer. Monday is interval work with chest bar pull-ups and a barbell movement. So that could be snatch, it could be clean and jerk, it could be deadlifts or front squats or any variation of a barbell. So even within this, we have a lot of variety built into by just saying it's a barbell and just saying it's an interval. Even though it's gymnastics with the movement defined and barbell work, it's still pretty varied within that. Then Tuesday, it would be weightlifting battery work, which is going to be pre-fatigued by cyclical work at a tempo. So in other words, maybe it's a 1K row into 5 squat cleans at 78%, with a 15-second transition between, rest 3 minutes after each one of those, and you're going to hit that for 4 to 5 total sets. That would be a really solid session for weightlifting battery work. And that could be something where the next week, maybe it's a clean and a jerk and it's a ski, or it could be a 5K assault bike into squat cleans. There's a number of ways that you could orient that and make that change over time. However, it's the exact same format, so there's still quite a bit of structure built into that. Wednesday could be a back squat progression. So there's a very structured thing. It's just going to be a linear progression. And then after that, you could go a Metcon with dumbbell movements. So what those dumbbell movements are paired with, or if they're paired with something, is completely open-ended and up to that coach's creativity in that moment. Friday is going to be an EMOM of weightlifting and hanging gymnastics. So something where you're hanging from the bar. So it could be toes to bar, bar muscle up. It could be chest to bar, and a weightlifting movement once again. And then Saturdays where you're going to hit your weightlifting percentages. And then afterwards, you're going to hit another Metcon with inverted gymnastics. So once again, the only thing that's actually specified is that you're getting upside down. So maybe it's a handstand push-up, maybe it's a strict handstand push-up, maybe it's a handstand walk. And then you could do any other movement within that. It could be a couplet, it could be a triplet. There's variety built into that, but every single time you're going to get upside down in a Metcon on Saturday. Now we're going to take this athlete and move them into competition prep. So maybe we're 6 to 8 weeks out from their competition. Here we're going to have a high amount of variety with moderate structure built into this. And really, it's just as much structure as they need to continue to progress at the things that they're weak at currently. And if there's something that's more severe and more likely to trip them up in a competition, like for example, someone doesn't have the first muscle up, but they're trying to qualify for an age group online qualifier, that's something that would take a very high priority and be very focused and structured, even though they're in a competition prep phase where a lot of the other elements are going to be highly varied. Anyway, let's continue with this athlete. Monday, they're going to be doing a broken Metcon with chest to bar or toes to bar. So it's very similar. We're still doing those hanging gymnastics, but now it's going from more interval formats to more of a more continuous work period. And a broken Metcon is just sort of a form of interval work that's a little bit longer, more close to mimicking a Metcon. Then Tuesday, they're going to go into weightlifting strength touches. So once again, they're still getting some weightlifting work every single week because we need to continue to maintain that strength that we developed in the off season. And then we're also going to do some barbell cycling on that day as well. So not just working on strength in relatively low fatigue environments where you have time to set up and time to drop and reset and make everything look pretty, but we're also now taking that to barbell cycling where things are going to be touch and go, or things are going to be light where you can move quicker, and things are going to be under higher fatigue. Wednesday is going to be fatigued muscle up intervals. So this could be something that's very similar to like the battery progression from last cycle, where it was like that 1K row into, power cleans at 80% or something like that. We could do the same sort of idea for muscle up intervals. So maybe it's 20 bar facing burpees and 10 ring muscle ups, rest 3 minutes. You're going to do that 4 times. Something like that, where you're getting your heart rate up and starting to create systemic or local fatigue that will actually interfere with the muscle ups. And after that, you're going to go into a Metcon. It needs to be a couplet, and one of the movements is going to be rowing. So maybe it's double unders and rowing. Maybe it's burpees and rowing. Maybe it's wall balls and rowing. Whatever it is, it's going to be rowing every single time. So you're getting doses of that every single week. There's your consistency and structure. However, there's still a lot of variety built into that. The time domain, the rep scheme, how things are going to look, that is all going to vary week to week. Friday is going to be weightlifting strength touches. So for example, if snatch fit in well on Tuesday, you're probably going to see a clean jerk on Friday. Or someone's like super inconsistent with something like a snatch, but they're super consistent with clean jerk. Maybe they snatch both days. Maybe they do, a variation of that if their lifts are really technically proficient, but they just need to work on more so strength. So maybe it's like a snatch grip deadlift or something like that. And then after that, they're going to go into a mid-range burpee Metcon. So mid-range meaning anywhere from maybe 5 to 8 minutes. And so it's going to be much more of a lactic type interval. And besides that, you get to decide what that structure is going to look like. So maybe it's a chipper one week, maybe it's an AMRAP the next week, maybe it's a 4-time workout the next week, up to you. Then Saturday is an open style workout, something like the name game that we do in the protocol, where it's very similar to what you're going to see in a online qualifiers type setting like the open. And maybe for this person, you specify something like, we're probably going to do a gymnastics and weightlifting couplet or a triplet that involves another movement, like a bodyweight movement, every single week. So every single time, because the things like the open really don't involve a lot of other cyclical elements, we're going to mainly stick to gymnastics and weightlifting. And if someone's weak in those areas, that's probably a pretty good strategy. So next, we're going to move this athlete into the competition phase. Once again, just like the limiter phase, it's low variety, high structure, because we need to have all the elements under our control, because we want to make sure this person's actually ready to go when they need to be ready to go. So on Monday, they're either going to be doing a retest. So for example, like maybe they tested something on Friday, they're going to retest then on Monday. So they're either going to be retesting, or they could do something like some strength work. So like maybe some back squat and then weightlifting strength percentage work. Tuesday, they're going to be doing muscle up skill work and skill touches in an interval format. So whatever things that you haven't gotten to in the open yet that you know you're likely to see are things that you're going to be doing just skill touches of. So maybe you haven't seen any sort of a box jump, so you're practicing different box jump variations. So you could be doing box jump overs and box jumps and burpee box jump overs and different variations like that, like a dumbbell weighted step up. All different things that you could potentially see since you haven't seen that specific element yet in an open workout, and you're highly likely to see that. And that's just something where you need a coach to be able to tell you if things are likely to come up in an open setting, statistically speaking. Thursday is going to be your active recovery day. So you can do fully rested skill work where you're not tired when you're doing it, in other words. So maybe you still don't have your handstand walks. It's a great time to practice your handstand walks in a completely unfatigued environment. So complete rest before you attempt a new one. You could be doing easy cyclical work, so like zone 0 or zone 1 work, less than 70% of your heart rate max for sure. And then mobility work or like foam rolling would be great. Then Friday will be your testing day. And then Saturday and Sunday are probably going to be recovery days where you could be doing like easy cyclical work, and mobility work, movement work, things where you're getting your body ready to go, especially if you're going to be retesting on Monday, where you can feel as normal as possible and as ready to go as possible. And you can certainly be doing video review and seeing how you can make up time and redo your strategy during those 2 days as well. And then lastly is post-competition recovery. So you're done with your competition. You're not getting back into training yet in a regimented sense. So here, we just really want this person to have as much variance as they find enjoyable and really low structure. So likely a coach is just going to say, do what you want over the next 2 weeks. I'm not going to talk to you a whole lot unless you really want to. I'm not going to program you anything. Jump into class maybe once or twice a week if you feel up for it after another week or two off. If you want to do some like freestyle is what I would call it, like strongman work or bodybuilding stuff that's kind of fun and different than you're used to, great. And then lastly, I would just say like try to get outside to walk or kayak or bike and spend some time with your family that you haven't had as much time to do. And the biggest thing as you're doing that, just make sure it's at a leisurely pace and that you're not trying to get a really solid workout in. Is that you're just kind of going through the motions, staying active and continuing to move during this period of recovery. And then you'd go back into a limiter phase and you'd start the whole process over again until the next competition that person does, and you can work backwards whenever that date is. So that's how I would balance your training calendar, training year for an athlete. So I really hope this was helpful in finding ways to balance structure versus variety. Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just started listening to the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while, I would encourage you to rate and review the show. And lastly, the best thing that you can do to support our work is also the best thing that you can do for your performance. And that is by hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.